Good morning. My name is Jillian Black, and welcome to the Department of Family and Support Services Training and Education on Gender-Based Violence and Human Trafficking RFP webinar. Joining me today is Adriana Camarda and Laura Ng with our Gender-Based Violence Division, here to provide details and to answer any questions you may have regarding this RFP. Due to the volume of participants, everyone has been placed on mute. Please submit questions via the questions box, and we will respond to questions at the midpoint and end of the presentation. Please use the question box to notify us of any technical issues. Please be advised that this webinar is being recorded. Anything stated at this webinar is not intended to change the solicitation document. Any changes will be in writing in the form of an addendum issued by the Department of Family and Support Services. The purpose of this webinar is to provide information for the solicitation. A copy of this recording will be posted on the DFSS YouTube channel with the link to the recording, and a PDF of the PowerPoint slides will be posted to the webpage at www.cityofchicago.gov/FSS under the alerts and/or funding opportunity tabs. Please give it up to 5 business days to upload. DFSS retains the right to share a list of registrants to this webinar along with their contact and organizational information at our discretion. As for the agenda, we just went through the welcome and the introductions. We're gonna delve into the purpose of the RFP, the background, information about the scope and program description, selection criteria, timeline, technical assistance for applicants and e-procurement, and then one last round for questions. And with that being said, Laura, please take it away.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Laura Ng, she, her pronouns. I am the project manager over this RFP. So we'll go ahead and go over in order of the agenda that Jillian just provided. So the purpose of this RFP is very straightforward. It's to provide training and education on gender-based violence and/or human trafficking that is tailored for institutions with staff who work directly with community members. We'll unpack that over the next several slides. And then trained institutions will also receive at least 6 months of technical assistance from the awarded agencies when a potential survivor of gender-based violence or human trafficking is identified. So when we're talking about why we're releasing this RFP in the first place, we recognize in our division that gender-based violence and human trafficking is a global public health concern. These are not one-off instances. And we know that during the pandemic, this was exacerbated, especially when many survivors had to remain home with their abusers because there's no place else to go. And we also know that according to the U.S. Agency for International Development, gender-based violence is associated with various negative consequences, including poor physical and mental health outcomes, limited access to education and poor learning outcomes, and increased costs related to medical and legal services. Finally, there's of course a lot more background, but finally, to summarize this point, individuals who experience domestic violence showed increased levels of depression, lower self-esteem, and higher levels of psychological distress when compared with non-battered individuals. So there's several goals to this RFP. We want to support training and education that take a public health approach by focusing on the root causes of violence, as well as specific individual, family, and community levels of violence. We also want agencies to offer follow-up curriculum for forms of gender-based violence or human trafficking that are beyond the respondent's expertise. So for example, if the awarded agency is focused on domestic violence only, there should be follow-up that is provided by an agency that specializes in sexual assault and human trafficking. Secondly, staff at all levels of an institution is educated on the realities of gender-based violence and human trafficking, its rate of impact for their participant population, how they can better identify it and offer resources towards healing and prevent long-term negative consequences. When we're talking about its rate of impact for their participant population, because these trainings are tailored for specific institutions, if you're working with a homeless service provider, we want to make sure that your presentation is tailored for the population that that institution or that agency may serve. So Of course, same thing for education institutions, hospital systems, and so on. And then lastly, provide supportive services in case of disclosure. We recognize that while most systems of care that a gender-based violence survivor may intersect with are not prepared to address all the risks and trauma they may experience, the goal of this RFP is to improve the education and awareness of the individuals in those systems to recognize and understand the impact of gender-based violence and the survivor's chance to overcome the challenges and barriers they present. Prior to 2023, so when we're talking about what has been happening currently, the city of Chicago had not previously funded prevention and education training in the areas of gender-based violence and or human trafficking. And we know that just overall in general, many agencies in all areas of gender-based violence and human trafficking have staff that conduct community trainings, but they are doing this while juggling other duties because there's little dedicated funding from both public and private funding sources focus on prevention efforts. We know that most funding addresses reactive efforts after violence has already occurred. But thankfully, due to ARP funding in 2023, our division was able to release an award for agencies to conduct community trainings on the topics of sexual assault and human trafficking. And we know, based on our own professional experience, as well as the experience of releasing the most recent RFP, that there's continues to be increasing requests for gender-based violence and human trafficking training, and dedicated funding for prevention and education will remain a constant need. So when we're talking about the target population for this RFP, these are institutions that have staff working in communities that experience higher rates of community violence, higher poverty rates, fewer educational opportunities, higher incidences of chronic disease, and lack resources to improve well-being. Examples of this include, but are not limited to, housing programs, human services, public benefit and workforce offices, healthcare settings, educational settings, seniors, caregivers, youth programs and children's services, hospitality and transportation, and community and faith-based service organizations. When we're talking about program requirements, it includes all of this, but please refer to the RFP itself for the full list of program requirements. They include, of course, providing gender-based violence and human trafficking education awareness in formats and settings where at-risk or vulnerable community members are predominantly served or are seeking services. So while we are asking you to address systems and institutions, we also want you to target those systems and institutions where folks experience higher rates of violence. So this program is not intended to focus on citywide public awareness or exclusive social media campaigns. It's also not intended to focus solely on just general community awareness. This is very institution-based. We want folks to follow standards for the content of the training, as stated in the RFP. That includes, but is not limited to. So the RFP does list a lot more than what you see here on the slide. It includes acknowledging the intersectionality of racism and gender inequality. It must be tailored to the organization's primary participant. So once again, that example of if you're doing a presentation for an institution that serves folks experiencing homelessness, we want to make sure that you're providing resources specifically for that population. Of course, we want your presentation to help identify and address all forms of gender-based violence and human trafficking. So if you do not address all forms in your agency, we want to make sure that you have those connections to be able to address the other forms of gender-based violence that we focus on primarily. We also want respondents to respond appropriately and in a trauma-informed manner to disclosures of abuse or violence, either, of course, right during the training or maybe right after the training or in the 6 months of technical assistance that we are asking agencies to provide. We also want you to engage and connect with the priority systems of care listed in the RFP, or also known as the target population when you refer to the RFP. And then we also need agencies to have capacity to provide service coordination through technical assistance for a minimum of 6 months post-training. When we're talking about performance goals and outcomes, we'll monitor a set of performance indicators by pre and post assessment of the attendees of your trainings that may include, but are not limited to, that 80% of participants will indicate on an evaluation survey that they agree the training provided them with a better understanding of gender-based violence and human trafficking, how to identify that, and what resources are available to survivors. We want 80% of participants to indicate feeling empowered to utilize the information learned today or learned during your presentation to reduce or prevent instances of gender-based violence or human trafficking. We would also like 80% of participants to indicate on their post-technical assistance period survey that they benefited from the program to address gender-based violence in their own operations. So that third bullet point that I just read is specifically for agencies and institutions that ask for that technical assistance. So we want those agencies to also fill out a survey stating what I just said. And then lastly, 70% of participants will indicate they can identify at least 2 resources available to gender-based violence and human trafficking survivors that they could not identify beforehand. To continue on goals and outcomes, to monitor and recognize intermediate progress toward the above performance indicators, or the last slide. We also intend to track output metrics that may include, but are not limited to, reaching at least 2,000 staff or individuals that serve at-risk or vulnerable community participants, and we will need them identified by ward, community area, and zip code likely. A minimum of 50 unique organizations or institutions will be trained with location by ward, community area, and zip code. We would like 50% of your participants who attend the trainings to complete an evaluation survey, and then at least 50% of the participants that utilize the technical assistance option will also complete a survey. If you've ever applied for funding from the city of Chicago, many of these bullet points will sound very familiar, but there are some nuances specific to this RFP. So starting with community involvement, DFSS will evaluate applications based on the following criteria, including the respondent demonstrates a clear understanding of the target population, including their strengths, assets, needs, and challenges, and will provide gender-based violence and human trafficking training. The respondent has expertise working with the target population and will solicit feedback and has relevant capabilities and or infrastructure needed to serve this group. So that is, for example, if you are serving survivors of domestic violence, that you do obviously have expertise serving that population. The respondent demonstrates a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And then lastly, the respondent demonstrates relationships with and capacity to refer training participants to community resources. When we're talking about organizational capacity, we're looking for respondents that have qualified staff responsible for program oversight and management. The respondent has adequate systems and processes to support monitoring program expenditures and fiscal controls. The respondent demonstrates ability to securely store participant data to maintain confidentiality, which of course we know is of utmost importance when we're talking about survivors of gender-based violence and human trafficking. And then lastly, the respondent demonstrates commitment to ongoing and relevant training for staff. When we're talking about strength of proposed program, this is where we put a lot of weight towards. The respondent clearly defines the gender-based violence and human trafficking curriculum to be provided directly or through partnerships and linkage agreements with other agencies that are appropriate to addressing the needs of and achieving desired outcomes of the priority audience and target population. The respondent's proposed program is supported by a strong national or local evidence base and or aligns with best practices for the relevant field. The respondent has the ability to adapt a training program that may be used or adapted for DFSS priority participants to educate and assist in serving or connecting survivors to resources. Making sure, of course, that your presentation is attendee specific. The respondent has partnerships or coordinates with other agencies to expand or improve services in a client-centered and comprehensive way. When we're talking about performance management and outcomes, we're looking for a respondent that demonstrates evidence of strong past performance against desired outcome goals and performance metrics and or other notable accomplishments in providing services to the target population. That asterisk is there and explained in the actual RFP, but we retain the right to look at previous performance data. So that's what that asterisk is referring to. Secondly, the respondent has experience using data to inform or improve its services or practices. And the respondent has the relevant systems and processes needed to collect, disaggregate, and analyze participant data. So regarding selection criteria, this is the last bucket here regarding reasonable cost, budget justification, and leverage of funds. We want to know that the respondent has the fiscal capacity to implement the proposed program. And the respondent demonstrates reasonable implementation costs and funding requests relative to its financial and human resources. The proposed budget supports the proposed scope of work or work plan. These are some standard attachments that we ask for most RFPs to the city, but that includes any reports or studies or documentation that show performance toward reaching your program goals, job descriptions for every staff person listed on the personnel budget, resumes for key staff that are already in those positions, and then your 12-month budget, which Adriana and Jillian will go more into, some common mistakes that we've seen in the past. Any formal linkage agreements that you have with other gender-based violence agencies to provide additional training and supportive services beyond the expertise of the responding agency. So once again, that idea that if your agency focuses mostly on domestic violence, we will need to see those formal linkage agreements to providers of sexual assault or human trafficking services. And then a list of other formal written linkage agreements between the respondent and other service providers that enhance the array of services offered to survivors. The list should detail who the linkages are with and what services they agree to provide for your participants. When we're talking about the evaluation process, you will be evaluated on the strengths of the proposal and the responsiveness to the selection criteria. Failure to submit a complete proposal or respond fully to all requirements may make your submission subject to rejection. That includes making sure that you have the correct budget uploaded. The commissioner will, upon review of recommended agencies, may reject, deny, or recommend agencies that have applied for grants based on previous performance and or area of need. And DFSS reserves the right to ensure that all mandated services are available citywide and provided in a linguistically and culturally appropriate manner. Here are some super important dates for folks. We're, of course, at the pre-proposal webinar today. If you have questions following this webinar, those questions are due to me by November 20th at 5 p.m. And then we will upload an amendment based on those questions that we receive afterwards to the e-procurement website. The applications for this RFP are due December 10th at 12 noon. That is a hard stop date. And then we're looking for agencies to start this program on January 1st, 2025. The term of this contract is 2 years. So once awarded, this is an award for 2 years, and the total amount of this RFP for each award year is $600,000 to be divided up to between 2 to 4 agencies. We want you to state the administrative cap for the program in the budget narrative and your indirect rate, which also includes attaching your indirect letter. There is no match requirement for this program. And we can't stress enough that the budget that you submit for this program should just be 1 year at a time. Cost category definitions are attached as budget instructions in every RFP. So that'll be available to you once you start looking at all the requirements. Be thoughtful and inclusive when developing your budget. Apply for your program's actual costs. So if there is a portion of your cost for this program that is beyond what we're able to fund, put that on there. We generally cannot give you more money than what you ask, but we also want to see your total program costs. Use the reasonable cost question on the application to discuss how you determine the cost reflected in the budget. Common errors. I'm actually going to let my supervisor, Adriana, address this, as she has a lot more experience knowing the common mistakes here.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you for taking us through all of the RFP technicalities. We do have one question in the box from Ashley that I'm going to address first, just as we receive questions, we'd like to address them in the subject. Her question is, so is the goal for this funding to fund full-time positions or close to full-time at qualified organizations to do training, education, and TA? Instead of, I have a full-time attorney working in this field who could do some of the trainings now and then. I think your question is spot on, Ashley. We could, based on the funding that we have available and the number of agencies we would like to fund, We would like, for you to propose whether you think that this is a part-time position and can do the training and the technical assistance with staff that you already have, or if you wanted to take a more comprehensive approach and be able to do more a comprehensive program and want to have dedicated full-time staff doing nothing but this work, you have options based on the funding we have available and to apply. I hope that wasn't a vague answer, but at the end of the day, the answer is both. If an agency feels like they can only take off what they can chew and can't hire another staff, but they have already a current staff who could address this, maybe a quarter or half of their time, we would appreciate those applications. If an agency wants to take a more comprehensive approach and have 1 or 2 FTEs, then they should apply as so. Okay. Having answered that, I'm going to go over a little bit of the things I've seen in my tenure here at DFSS when it comes to RFPs and proposals. One of the most common things that I've seen, and going back to, not here on the screen, but going back to what Laura may have said, or what she did say and what it implies, you don't have any advantage of skipping answers or not replying to the answers. Every answer or a question should be answered, or you will lose points on those questions. So that's one thing. Be very cognizant of the attachments that are required of the application or anything that we've asked for you to upload. There is no limit to things that you can upload, but if we've asked for job descriptions and resumes of key staff, please upload those. Certifications that they may have in this area is very important. And I can't stress enough to use, and it's bold and capitalized here, is to use the form that's provided as part of the application. And that's specifically alluding to the budget. We've seen other applicants attach their own version of the budget. That is not acceptable. We really need the form that is attached in the iSupplier system or provided in the iSupplier system. And we need that attachment or your application will be deemed or rejected based on that. When you're submitting or looking at the budget, be very careful to follow the budget instructions. We've seen agencies put all of their requests in one column that talks up, like either is all of the DFSS share or is all of the agency share. Be very cognizant of what you're asking for is the DFSS share, and what you're bringing to the table perhaps, and it could be 0, is in that column, and then there's a total. So be cognizant of that. Check your fringe calculations, check all of the eligible activities under the program requirements that you could qualify for. I've seen many proposals that don't take into account material, supplies, equipment, subcontracting, even if it's for accounting purposes. Also, this is a program where you're providing training and you're really looking to collect as many surveys as possible. I don't want to put that idea out there, but think about what incentives you could apply to getting those things, or what you could pass out. Now, customarily, DFSS does not cover food, but there could be maybe agency materials and supplies that you print, or giveaways, or what do you call them, to pass out pens with your agency's printed materials as incentives to give surveys. So don't forget that. Obviously, in this application, there is no client assistance. You'll be training and providing TA to agencies. But if there is an opportunity, or if you have an idea of able to provide client assistance, don't forget that item. And like I said, put your budget in the appropriate column of what you're requesting. Sometimes it's very difficult on our end to interpret what agencies are doing in the budget if they don't follow the instructions. And of course, the column where your agency is showing what you are bringing to the table is match, although it's not required. But it does signify that when we're looking at the total program, and in Ashley's example, if the staff person is an FTE but only applying 25 to 50% of their time, their other time is probably going to be also working on this program and providing the TA, or for example. So we want to know what the FTE is doing on the other time, or what your agency can provide to the total program as well. I'll stop there if there are any questions that anybody can put in the chat if you have questions on what I've provided so far. Okay, next slide. One other thing is, just as a best practice, as I can't stress enough, the application is in a city operated Department of Procurement platform. It is not DFSS controlled, and in order to give quality opportunity to all agencies to apply, we have no control or no authority to extend the deadline. So the deadline is December 10th at 12 p.m. Applications that are emailed to me and Laura will not be accepted, or Jillian for that matter. You know, and if you are having problems with the iSupplier system, please do not wait until December 9th or 10th to reach out to us. We recommend that you start your application earlier, especially if you're an agency that may have not ever used iSupplier before, or if you're someone at an agency who doesn't have experience using iSupplier before. iSupplier accounts are like to the individuals at a organization. And so you have to iron those out before noon on the day the application is due. We have another question in the chat, so I'm going to address that before I move it over to Jillian. Is it allowable to provide training services to organizations in South Suburban Cook County, or do we have to keep it all services in the city? That is a very good question. While we cannot control who attends your trainings or where the staff of the organizations that we've identified we want like you to train where they live, the organizations are more than likely going to be serving clients in Chicago. So that is the restriction. It's the organization has to be serving clients in Chicago. But if that staff person lives in Country Club Hills, that is perfectly fine.
Okay. Now that we addressed that question, we're gonna move forward into application tips. So first, want to start off by stressing to start the application as early as possible and to save as often as possible. If you have never done business with the City of Chicago, please register into e-procurement ASAP. Review RFP narratives and application questions closely. Remember that they align with the scope and the selection criteria. Please use the information in the RFP for guidance in formulating your answers. There is a 4,000 character limit, which includes punctuation and spaces. Each response is allotted 4,000 characters. Please do not use the back button on your browser. And again, we would like to stress to start your application as early as possible and to save it as often as possible. Additional tips working in e-procurement. To submit multiple applications for a single RFP, applicants will need to set up a unique user account in iSupplier. The e-procurement system is not capable of submitting more than one distinct proposal per associated email address. Therefore, you must use a separate email address for each submission. This is for RFPs that require a cost proposal in place of a budget form, which does not apply to this RFP, so I'm gonna skip this bullet. But for the bullet following that, you can submit your application and later amend it up to the due date of December 10th at 12 noon. Avoid the rush and possible mishaps by submitting early. Plan on submission taking 30 to 60 minutes. Please be advised that late applications cannot be accepted. Please make use of the e-procurement hotline if you have any, if you need any assistance at 312-744-4357. Please note that the hotline operates during business hours only, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Once again, save your application as often as you can and submit as early as you can. As for agency requirements, agencies must provide articles of incorporation and any amended articles of incorporation. An IRS affirmation letter is also required, but this is only for not-for-profit agencies only. This letter must be dated within 60 days of submission. You can obtain this by calling the IRS directly at 1-877-829-5500. If you are a for-profit agency, submit your original letter from the IRS showing your FEIN number. A UEI number is required from the agency, as well as a central contractor registration, which can be found on the www.sam.gov website. And lastly, a certificate of good standing letter with the state of Illinois is required. As of April of this year, we have a new labor peace agreement ordinance, which will apply to all DFSS and CDPH delegates that have 20 or more employees working for their organization. This does not apply to hospitals. Contractor must provide written notice to the commissioner or her designee within 72 hours of becoming aware that employees want to organize or that a union seeks to represent employees. Contractor must enter into an LPA within 90 days of receiving notice from an organization that it represents or seeks to represent employees. You may ask, what is an LPA? An LPA is an agreement between an employer and a labor union that assures that an organizing drive is not impacted by union busting techniques, including employee retaliation, and in return, they will not strike or stop work in a way that will impact human services. For technical assistance on the DFSS webpage, there is a link to there will be a link to the RFP of interest and training documents. Please see the alerts section of the website. For questions on registration and e-procurement technical assistance, please reach out to customer support at cityofchicago.org, and they also can be reached at 312-744-4357. And lastly, we do have training materials, which includes documents and videos on the cityofchicago.org website under online training materials. Now that we got that out the way, we're going to delve into how to enter your response and accepting amendments. In the case of this RFP, we will have an amendment, being that we have received a couple of questions. And so this will show you how to move forward with accepting an amendment, and then soon after enter your responses. Step 1, select create quote from the drop-down menu in the actions box, and then click on go. This will take you to the application page where you can get started. If the RFP you are interested in has been amended, in this case, it will be. You will need to acknowledge and accept the amendment to start and and submit a response. To accept the amendment, click on the View Amendment History link. To begin the acceptance and acknowledgement process, please follow these steps after clicking View Amendment History. First, you click on the document number. Next, click on the infinity or eyeglass icon to review the amended changes up to the RFP. And then you click on the Acknowledge Amendments button to acknowledge receipt and understanding of the changes, and then proceed. By acknowledging the amendment, you are indicating that you are aware of the changes made to the RFP in the amendment. Now, when you get to the screen, you click on the I accept box and then click on Acknowledge. Next, you click on Yes to indicate that you confirm your acknowledgement of the amendment. Finally, you click on the checkbox that you accept the terms and conditions, and then you click on Accept to actually accept them. And that is the final step in acknowledging and accepting the amendment. Once you accept the amendment, we're going to move forward into how to submit your application. So when you enter all your responses and you attached everything that we request and you're ready to submit, you can start by saving your draft one last time and then clicking continue. The system will let you know if you are missing information. There will be an error at the upper left hand of the page that will tell you what you're missing, which is extremely helpful. In this example, the error message indicated that the lines had not been filled out. In this example, the error is about an unanswered question in the application or requirement section. The quote value refers to your, in this case, missing answer. Once your application is free from errors, you are ready to proceed and submit. At this point, clicking continue should put your application into the review and submit phase. Once you see this screen, this is something like a summary screen, and this will also be your last chance to review all of your data and confirm that it's accurate. Please check all of your attachments and scroll down to the bottom of the screen to see all of your responses. And then at the bottom of the screen, you will be asked to provide an electronic signature. Please be sure to fill in the signature before checking the box. And then lastly, you can hit submit. Make sure that you see this submittal confirmation screen. The e-procurement system will send a confirmation email within 24 hours of your submission. However, if you don't receive that email, please call or email me if you desire confirmation prior to then. And then we're going to open the floor for another round of questions. Looks like we don't have any questions at this time, but our questions deadline is November 20th. So you still have time. And then listed here is Laura Ng's information. When you have any additional questions outside of this webinar, her information, her number is 312-743-1939, and she could also be reached via email at laura.ng@cityofchicago.org. And then for non-programmatic questions, if you have any questions regarding the e-procurement system, assistance on submitting your response, you can reach out to the e-procurement hotline at 312-744-4357. And they can also be reached via email at customersupport@cityofchicago.org. Or you can also reach out to me. My name is Jillian Black, and my email information is jillian.black@cityofchicago.org. And I'm going to ask if Laura and Adriana have anything they want to add before we close out. Okay. Good luck on submitting your submissions, your responses, and thank you for attending our webinar this morning, and everyone have a good day.
Thank you, Jillian. Thank you, Laura.
No problem.